Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
An update on the current wildfire situation in BC. A note, there will also be a brief update from Emergency Management BC on last night's earthquake in Alaska. This briefing will be hearing from Rob Schweitzer, Director of Fire Center Operations with the BC Wildfire Service, Peter Brock, Executive of Regional Operations, Emergency Management BC, Catherine Ford, Executive Director of Disaster Risk Reduction with Emergency BC, and finally, Dr. Bonnie Henry, the Provincial Health Officer. We also have Staff Sergeant Janelle Choyette of the BC RCMP if there are questions for her on the line. And a reminder to me line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You will be limited to one question and one follow-up. With that, I'll turn it over to the Director of Fire Center Operations with the BC Wildfire Service.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So the current situation in BC right now from the wildfire is we've seen about 1,250 wildfires since April 1st of this year. And that's resulted in nearly 456,000 hectares of area burned. The 10-year average this time is 658 fires and about 106,000 hectares burned. There are currently 245 active fires in BC, and 36 of those are what we consider wildfires of note. Of that 245, 181 of those are due to natural causes. 15 of them are considered to be human caused. This week, the number of daily ignitions have subsided, and the wildfires currently burning has also decreased. It has been a pleasure to welcome additional out-of-province resources over the past. Our partners from other provinces, Mexico, and the Canadian Armed Forces are all actively working on incidents. Our Australian partners are also being assigned, or in country and being assigned as we speak today. So today and tomorrow will be hot. Severe burning conditions will be seen in the south half of the province. And there'll be overnight burning on these incidents. Then come Saturday and Sunday, we anticipate a bit in the weather. So while this has been a relatively stable week we see some instability in the forecast. So really what that means is we'll see a bit more fresh air in the interior of the south province. And it'll bring, that short-lived increase in fire growth. Visibility is a welcome shift for our aviation teams who have been significantly hampered in their ability to conduct operations. However, we also anticipate some lightning and are monitoring this closely for new fire starts. The incoming system will have some rain, and this change continues into next week with overall cooler temperatures in the southern interior. Regions are in drought condition, so the amount of rain we receive will be very important. So anticipation of the lightning for the BC Wildfire Service is maintaining initial attack preparedness. And what we call initial attack is the first response to a combination of very mobile 3-person crews in conjunction with our aviation resources. Prioritizing initial attack has been a pivotal tactic across the entire season. And given the fuel conditions and the high temperatures we've experienced in the central and southern interior, as well as the southeast part of the province, fire growth with these new starts have been very aggressive. And poor visibility due to smoke has significantly impacted our aviation operations this previous week. So clearer skies are welcome. So I've just shared with you what the BC Wildfire Service is doing in preparation for this weekend. And I often get, what can I do as a member of the public? So we are urging travelers and residents to be extremely cautious over this BC day. People intending to travel anywhere in the province should first check for road closures, evacuation alerts, orders and other prohibitions, such as rec sites that might be closed or BC parks closures. Travel to any areas that are subject to evacuation alerts or orders. So all the rating, that's the risk of a wildfire starting, is currently low or very low in some parts of the province, mostly in the north half. People must still exercise extreme caution to ensure their activities do not spark a new wildfire. Many of the BC's forests and grassland remain dry due to unprecedented heat and little rain early in the fire season. All BC wildfire resources are permitted, and with lightning in the forecast, not afford any human-caused fires this weekend. So please be responsible and support our teams to be successful. I'll turn it back over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Rob. Our next speaker is Peter Brock, Executive Director of Regional Operations for Emergency BC.
Good afternoon. I'm going to provide a provincial overview on evacuation orders and alerts. And
I believe you're on.
Can you hear me now?
You're good. My apologies.
Yeah, no problem. So good afternoon. I'm going to provide a provincial overview on evacuation orders and alerts, some other key information. Currently in British Columbia, due to the wildfires, we have 8 states of local emergency, 8 band council resolutions, 62 evacuation that represent approximately 3,443 properties on order. We have 87 evacuation alerts, represents approximately 17,679 properties on alert. There are currently 19 reception centers supporting. That includes 9 in central BC, 4 in northeast BC, 3 in southeast BC, 3 in southwest. Over 6,094 evacuees have registered in total. There are 5 group lodging facilities set up. That includes 3 in central BC, 2 in the southwest, for a total of 800 beds. Of those 800 beds, we have 161 persons located in group lodging at this time. The number of group lodging fluctuate due to activation and deactivation and depending on need and the sites. The maximum capacity for group lodging is dependent not only on the number and size of sites, but also on the availability of volunteers and other factors. We have 3 key messages for British Columbians. 1, create a plan so that you can stay with friends and family if you're evacuated. 2, on evacuation order, leave immediately. 3, if placed on evacuation alert, be prepared to leave quickly. And finally, if you've been evacuated community due to wildfires, you should register with emergency support services, whether you need the support or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. For our next update, we will see Emergency Management BC. This time we'll hear from Catherine Ford, Executive Director of Disaster Risk Reduction.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'll provide an overview of the tsunami event in Alaska over the course of the evening. So at about 11:21, the U.S. Geological Society and the National Tsunami Warning Center notified the province that a magnitude 8.2 earthquake was recorded miles southwest of Chignik, Alaska. And this National Tsunami Warning Center, which is also located in Alaska, it's the lead agency for information on earthquakes and the generation of tsunamis along the coast for British Columbia, as well as for North America. The National Tsunami Warning Center advised of tsunami danger was being evaluated for coastal British Columbia, and that we would be provided updated information as it becomes available. And so Emergency Management BC immediately initiated the provincial emergency notification system, which is a text-to-speech, phone, and email notification. And it goes out to government officials, media, as well as local government and emergency managers. So typically we activate the system for a tsunami warning, a watch, or an advisory. But because of the size of the event and the proximity of coastal BC, we wanted to ensure our emergency management partners received that information for their preparedness, but also for determination should they wish to activate their emergency plans. And so Emergency Management activated our Provincial Emergency Coordination Center. And so we were monitoring and active on social media throughout the event to support communities in their. And the Alert Ready system was ready to be activated if a tsunami warning had been issued. And I'll just repeat that BC was evacuation status for the duration of the event. At no point was BC under a tsunami watch or warning. And so although there was no threat of a tsunami to BC, this event, it does demonstrate that coast warning systems do work. I'll just remind folks, please do not call 911 for information on the tsunami in BC. Only call 911 is at stake. So it's important that these lines are freed up for those who have immediate need. And in the event of a future tsunami warning, please stay safe and listen to your local officials and head to higher ground.
Thank you. Final speaker, we'll turn it over to Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. So we have a lot of things on the agenda today, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the concerns that we have coming up with weather, and that is we've heard from Rob Schweitzer, will be affecting much of the southern part of the province, the lower mainland and the interior, adding to the concerns that people can have along with the wildfire and smoke that we're already dealing with. And just to remind people that heat can be deadly, and we have seen that earlier on in this season, in the last month. We want to remind people that extreme heat exceeds risks from things like COVID-19 and the smoke risks that can cause irritation for many people. So heat builds up over the course of a few days, and particularly it can build up indoors. So we're asking people to check on people at higher risk in person to have temperature indoors, or ask people to say what it says on the thermostat. Encourage people who may not know that they are susceptible to baths. Sleep in the coolest part of your room, or if you can, stay with friends who may have cooler housing or have air conditioning. We know that cooling centers are going to be up and will be coordinated by municipalities, and you can sites of your health authority, your municipality, to find where they will be. If people are wearing a mask and have difficulty breathing, remove your mask, whether you're inside or outside, as that can also affect your ability to thermoregulate or regulate your body. We know that anyone can suffer from heat-related illness, but some people are at greater risk, particularly infants and young children rely on adults to monitor their environments and provide enough fluid to drink. People who are underhoused, who have fewer options, avoid prolonged exposure to heat. People 65 years of age and older, or anyone who needs assistance in monitoring their well-being on a regular basis. We also know that people with heart problems or breathing difficulties can also have challenges with heat. The symptoms of heat-related illness can range from mild to severe, and they can creep up on people quickly. Pale, moist skin, heavy sweating, muscle rashing, having a rash, swelling, especially in the feet and hands, fatigue, weakness, and lightheadedness, and vomiting are all signs that you need to seek a cooler environment, and for some people, you may need medical attention. If you are going to be with more symptoms, including things like high fever, very high body temperature, hallucinations, seizures, or losing consciousness, you require urgent medical attention, and you should call 911, move to a cool place, or cool person down with water and fanning. For others, you can call 1 to receive more information you can do to protect yourself from heat, or you can look on the bccdc.ca website. There's a lot of information, and on your local authority website to provide information about how you can cool down, particularly if you don't have access to air conditioning in the next few weeks. Things like finding the coolest room in your house, putting an ice tray in front of a fan, using a personal mister, wearing a wet t-shirt, or using a wet sheet at night are all things that can help you stay cool when the temperatures are hot. Also important, opening windows and doors only when the outdoor temperature goes down below the indoor temperature, so at night. and shutting your windows and doors and curtains to keep cooler in and the sun out during the day. Who may not have access to cooler areas themselves. Reminding people, of course, most important, never ever leave children or pets alone in a car in the heat. It can creep up very quickly and it can be lethal. So these are some things that we want people to think about over the next few days as we're expecting the temperatures to increase across the province, and hopefully it will cool off by the end of the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the operational updates. A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You will be limited to one question and one follow-up. A request as well to media, please take yourselves off speakerphone or Bluetooth if you're asking a question. For the first question, we go to Andrea Wu, Globe and Mail.
Hi there. I have a question for Dr. Henry about COVID and not wildfires. As you know, Alberta is ending most of its COVID-19 measures, which means that there will be no more routine testing, no more contact tracing outside of high-risk settings, no more isolating those who are positive. I'm wondering what your response is to Albertans who want to visit BC this summer, and does BC have the ability to turn away Albertans or do anything to further protect locals in light of this?
So these are some measures that Alberta's announced that are coming into effect later on in the summer. So clearly not right now, and they are very much actively following up people, testing people, as are we. And you know, of course, that yesterday we declared an outbreak in the central Okanagan, the area of British Columbia that is experiencing a lot of issues around heat, wildfires, evacuations. And part of that was reminding people not to travel to those areas unless you are fully vaccinated. So those are the messages that we have for people from Alberta as well. We're happy to have you come fully vaccinated. And when you're here, we expect that everybody takes the measures that we are continuing to take in British Columbia to protect people both from wildfires, fires, from the smoke, and also from COVID-19. We are seeing an increase in cases, not unexpected in most places, but as we mentioned yesterday, we have had a rapid increase in one area of the province, and there are additional measures that are in place in that area to try and prevent transmission. And while we don't expect that we will be turning people away, we do expect that people will take the precautions that we're requiring of everybody once they're in British Columbia.
Andrea, do you have a follow-up?
I do not. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. For the next question, we go to Marcella Bernardo, News 1130.
Hi there. I've taken myself off speakerphone, so hopefully you can hear me. Just hoping to ask Dr. Henry also about, you mentioned people who don't have air conditioning in the heat wave. Is this something that the Provincial Health Office is looking into as far as retrofitting older buildings that don't have air conditioning and ensuring that any new buildings do have it? Because I spoke with BC's Chief Coroner, Lisa Lapointe, yesterday, and she indicated that that's something that we need to consider now in the wake of climate change.
Absolutely. And, you know, the heat dome that we experienced earlier this summer was really an intensity that we have never, ever experienced in this province. And as you know, some of the highest temperatures ever recorded in Canada. We are looking at how we can learn as much as possible, recognizing that with climate change, we are going to have more extreme heat events in the future. And this weekend is no different, although we don't expect it to be nearly as intense as what we experienced in July. So we're working with the BC Centre for Disease Control, Dr. Sarah Henderson, Tom Kozatsky. My colleagues there have been working on heat and the impacts of heat, particularly in urban environments, because we know that there are intensity of heat can build up in what we call urban heat islands. So areas where there's a lot of the built environment, concrete and asphalt roads, for example, that can absorb the heat and keep the temperatures high at night. So there are a number of things that we're looking at. We're looking at mapping out exactly where the excess deaths happened, where people were having challenges with heat illness, heat-related illness. And yes, some of it is related to buildings. Some of it is related to the built environment and being able to increase green space. So air conditioning is part of it. We know there's a lot of buildings in British Columbia, in the Lower Mainland, that do not have air conditioning. As a matter of fact, the majority of buildings in this province don't. And which is different from other parts of the country. So yes, those are all things we're going to be looking at. In the short term, though, I mean, those are longer term issues that we need to think through. In the short term, like this weekend, for the rest of the summer, what we need to do is connect with people. We know from discussions with the coroner's office that a lot of the people who were affected by our latest heat wave were people who lived alone and didn't necessarily recognize the impact that heat was having on them. So we all need to take personal measures to keep cool. Tricks like I mentioned, like wearing a damp shirt, having your sheets damp at night, and having a fan, finding the coolest place in your room, or reaching out to neighbors and friends who may have, or family who may have a cooler place that you can stay. And this is really important for the coming weeks, to check on particularly elderly people, people who are bedridden or have mobility issues, so we can help get through this summer as well. But longer term, we need to look at all of those things.
Marcella, do you have a follow-up?
I do, and this question is, I think, for Rob Schweitzer, if you feel comfortable answering this, and I know you've talked about this before, but how is this heat wave and other heat waves, or just heat in general, impacting the frontline firefighters as they are trying to cope with trying to keep the flames or contain the flames, but also keeping themselves healthy and safe?
Yeah, so I did address this a little bit last week, on the Tuesday call, but it is a challenge. There's no doubt for our crews, and our crews, they're highly fit, highly trained, and really what we need to pay attention to through our support networks and through our first aid is making sure they're getting the rest required, getting the being hydrated, making sure that they are hydrated, and taking many breaks throughout the day. The other thing that we've really focused on internally with our staff is making sure that after their 14-day shift working on the fire line, that they actually get the time off that they need to rest and recuperate. And so we've really paid close attention to that this year, as well as our contractors as well that are help supporting us on the line, as well, and also the support staff that we have working in all of our buildings that support the frontline workers. It is a challenge, there is no doubt, but we want to make sure that because of the length of the season, that they have the ability to stay resilient, healthy throughout the entire season, not just for that 2-week deployment. I did explain some of the tactics and measures that, on Tuesday, but it continues to be a challenge, especially with having aerial resources limited due to the visibility. So that really does put a heavier focus on our ground crews and our heavy equipment to do that work. And we are still seeing, and you'll see the information bulletin is really, given the conditions that we're experiencing, we do need to use fire as a tool to reinforce those guards and actually eat up some of that fuel between our guards and the actual fire front to actually steer and control these fires better. So it's a bit of a combination of a number of different tactics, but our number one concern for our people that are on the line is their well-being, is making sure that they're getting the rest that they're needed.
For the next question, we go to Richard Zussman, Global News.
I think this is for Dr. Bonnie Henry as well as emergency services. Around one of the mentions in this call already was about how we have emergency alerts available via text message and other mechanisms for earthquakes. Should we start considering using those for things like heat waves or COVID outbreaks to notify people through text message around concerns related with those type of events?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a really good point. We really do want to look at all the hazards that we have in BC, and we do monitor those hazards and try to identify what the best use of notification systems are for BC. We know that some of the Alert Ready technology, as discussed before, is certainly not a replacement of what is currently out there for notifying communities or providing information bulletins. And of course, we really want to make sure we get it right and balance the amount of notifications and really ensure that we don't create, let's say, public apathy with over notifying. So we know it's important, and we also know it's a priority for us to look at some of these other hazards, as you mentioned, to see how those can fit into new ways of doing business. But for now, our current focus is really to ensure that we're working with communities to provide them what they need, and that's what we're doing right now. Thank you.
I think perhaps I can just add on to that, Richard, in that heat. We've had in health, we've had a committee that's been working on heat and heat alerts for a number of years, but they tend to be regional. So we see local impacts of heat until this past year, where it really was the first time ever that we had it over the entire province for that period of time. So again, it was another way that was in some ways a wake-up call for us in how climate change is making these things more intense and more widespread. But as I talked about, we tend to get very focal areas where heat can be lethal, particularly in urban areas. So it is very much about having that ground notification, local neighborhoods, and even streets and buildings checking on each other. So we need to do better at trying to mobilize that local support for people who need it. But we're looking at all the ways that we can do that for sure.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
This is a COVID-related question for Dr. Henry. Dr. Henry, you said earlier this week you're losing patients for those in long-term care who are not vaccinated. What specifically are you going to do about those who are not vaccinated that work in the healthcare system? And is there still any consideration being given to mandatory vaccination for those in the healthcare system?
Yeah, so I've also mentioned that we are working on that and looking at particularly long-term care. I mentioned earlier, I'm putting in place an order that requires reporting of all staff, residents, and volunteers and people who work in long-term care so that public health can verify immunization status. And we'll be putting that in place over the next few weeks. My goal is to make sure that we have all of those opportunities for everybody, not only in long-term care, but in healthcare in general, to receive vaccination. And as you know, we have our big push on for the next couple of weeks. But we need to be prepared for the fall, because it's not going to be only COVID that is our issue. We'll be having, I expect, back to our regular respiratory season, and we have outbreaks of influenza and RSV and other respiratory diseases that cause not only illness but death in long-term care and in healthcare settings as well. So yes, we're in the process of working with HEABC, with the unions, and with healthcare workers themselves to make sure that we have policies in place that that require immunization, and if people are not able to be immunized, that we have other measures in place to ensure that we're doing everything we can to protect those most vulnerable people, particularly in long-term care. And so there will be more information about that. I mentioned that there are other consequences, having to use additional PPE and infection prevention protocols, as well as testing on a regular basis. So we are working through those processes right now.
For the next question, we go to Colton Davies, Radio NL.
Hey there, thanks for doing this. My first question is for the BC Wildfire Service. I'm just curious when it comes to the campfire ban being lifted for the entire northern half of the province as of yesterday. As of today, the fire risk is moderate to high for most of the Prince George and Northwest fire centers. And we've been told how stretched resources are right now for fighting fires. Are you concerned that we might see more human-caused fires in northern BC with this campfire ban lifted and the conditions that we're seeing, which could potentially pull resources off of other fires in our province?
Yeah, so I'm not concerned that we're going to see an increase in human-caused fires. There's a lot of work that goes into our decision makers before coming up with a decision whether or not to put a prohibition in place or to remove it. And so we factor in obviously the weather, the buildup index, which is really the available fuel, on the ground to create and start a fire, the weather forecast that's for the future, and really look at all those things. And one of the things that we've been challenged with in previous years was not being responsive enough and not using enough science to make those decisions. And so over the past few years, we've utilized this formula to really have science drive our decisions, guide our decisions on when to implement prohibitions or remove them. And so in the case of the Prince George and the Northwest Fire Centers, we were hitting up against those thresholds. We knew the weather was going to change a bit, but we still believe that it's going to take a number of days with a certain weather forecast to actually where we'll hit the threshold of putting a prohibition back into place. And we don't expect that to occur over this weekend. And so we will continue to closely monitor it. And if the forecast doesn't play true for the precipitation that's, scheduled or forecast for that part of the province, then we'll look at it early next week again, and we may have to put prohibitions back in place. We always consider the available resources. We still have initial attack resources available in the north, and we keep them there just for the chance that there may be a human-caused or a lightning-caused fire. So we'll remain, those parts of those resources will remain in the north in preparation of that. And again, we'll monitor the weather and the forest fuel conditions to determine if a prohibition needs to come back into place.
Do you have a follow-up, Colton?
And thank you for that explanation. I think my next question is for Dr. Henry, and we've had a blanket of smoke really in Kamloops for almost every day this month, and I understand that with this weather system of cooler weather that we're expecting, we might get a reprieve on Sunday and Monday or so. But we've been told this week, our newsroom has by Environment Canada, that we could expect smoke for most days for up to 2 more months unless we get some help from the weather conditions. So for people living in these smoky conditions, how do we handle this, and just how hazardous is this heavy smoke, when we're talking about 10+ air quality ratings for things like work?
Yeah, I've been talking with my colleagues who are up there in Kamloops and Kelowna as well. But yes, wildfire smoke is something that is a type of air pollution that is slightly different than human-caused air pollution from traffic or industry, but it can also be mostly irritating and mostly short-lived. It's hard to believe that short-lived, when we're seeing it for weeks and months, but we know that it can cause, it makes it harder for your lungs to get oxygen into your blood. That is the bottom line. So it can cause irritation to your respiratory system. And we also know it can cause an inflammatory response over time. So that's why it is important for people to take measures to reduce their exposures to smoke. And when it's been smoky skies like what you're experiencing it, things like wearing a mask if you have to be outdoors is something that can be helpful. Staying inside and, balancing the risk of heat, though usually when it's as smoky as it is, that dissipates the heat a little bit. And it is more important to try and be in an area where you have cleaner air. Portable air cleaners that use HEPA filtration can help. and forced air heating, if you have that, can minimize the amount of smoke that comes into your home. But, you know, we also need to take those measures about not exercising outside because that can increase the amount of smoky air that gets into our lungs. We don't yet know what this means long term. They are transient exposures, even ones that go on for several weeks, but there's very little research on whether there's longer lasting health effects from seasonal wildfire smoke, and I know many people would have experienced it a few years ago as well. We are working on that to try and understand that, but the bottom line right now is that the same people that are susceptible to heat are the people that may have conditions exacerbated by smoke as well. And preventing as much exposure to the smoke as you can is really important. And for some people, it may mean that trying to go to another part of the province and staying with family and friends for a period of time might be helpful. You know, I know a number of years ago in 2017, when we had that, the smoke really blanketed the entire province for a long period of time. It was very difficult for people to get away. We're hopeful that as the winds pick up a little bit, that the smoke will dissipate from where it's really been stuck over Kamloops for the last little while. Just taking all the measures that you can to try and find cleaner air is really important.
We have time for one more question, then we go to Brenna Owens, the Canadian Press.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for taking my question. I think this is probably for provincial officials, but I am curious for the take of the officials on this call. There's a paper out today by a group of UBC forest and wildfire experts and signed by others, including the Mayor of Vernon. It's warning about billions of dollars in increased suppression costs, other indirect costs of fire as the seasons worsen with climate change. And they also cite Health Canada research suggesting hundreds of people could die every year prematurely from smoke exposure. So they're calling for urgent and much bigger landscape scale reduction of fuel in the forest and more engagement with local communities. So does having multiple record-breaking fire seasons, extreme heat and drought in recent years prompt like a more urgent overhaul of how we manage in between fire seasons?
I think so. I should take that one. And I guess first off, I would start with, you know, following the 2017 and 2018 wildfire seasons, there was a strong recent recognition on the work that needs to be done with communities and with reducing the amount of fuel in the forest. This is not something new. This is something that was pointed out in the Filman report back in the early 2000s. And what I would suggest is, you know, following the 17-18 season, we've seen a renewed focus both on funding from the provincial government, as well as engagement from local communities to complete this work in and around their communities for fuel protection. We also continue to work as a ministry with the forest industry in trying to minimize the amount of woody debris left in the forest following timber harvesting. And so it is. There isn't one measure or one option that solves all the problems because of the fact that we've seen, as you described, a bit with the climate change, and then obviously with the pine beetle epidemic that this province experienced over the last 10 to 15 years. We need to continue to look at how do we manage these unhealthy forests because of the pest and because of what we've seen through the changing weather. On how do we minimize that risk or that exposure with wildfire? You know, I'm part of many different planning tables and discussions within this province and within this ministry on how do we do this better? Like, how do we reintroduce fire back onto the landscape? Fire is a naturally occurring event in many of the ecosystems in the province. So through prescribed fire, through utilization of Indigenous traditional knowledge in use of fire, as well as amending our forest harvesting practices and the woody debris left behind are all pieces that we continue to discuss and actually start to change policy and implement new strategies to help reduce that amount of fuel that's left behind. Combine that with, as I alluded to earlier, the real desire from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to engage in this work, funded by the provincial government, to actually do a lot more treatments in and around communities. And that could be mechanical treatments, thinning, spacing, and the use of fire to help reduce those fuels, to protect those communities, or help minimize the risk to those communities from a catastrophic wildfire. There's a lot more work to be done. I haven't read that report yet or saw that media article, but it's not the first time that we've seen experts and scientists tell us that this is something that we need to really pay attention to and adapt our practices. And I know with the BC Wildfire Service and the ministry that we work for, that is something that we take very seriously and have a number of different programs and staff focused on it full time to continue to improve the state of the forest to help minimize this risk to the province in the future.
Brenna, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure. I guess just quickly, I'm interested in kind of the capacity of staff in the off season. So I know there's a big mobilization of crews for the fire season, but does BC and the Wildfire Service and, working with forest industry and other communities need to look at, getting more people involved in these strategies all across the landscape at a scale?
So we do utilize our staff in the shoulder seasons currently to do field mitigation work. And we are engaged in conversations about, is that a workforce that we should look at employing year round to do implement some of these treatments in and around communities. With the funding, we are able to, through our ministry, through UBCM and through local governments, able to provide funding to them to actually employ contractors, the contracting community, and other workers in this field to do this work as well. So it's a bit of a collaboration at times. Either BC Wildfire staff are actually helping deliver on some of that work or helping do the prescriptions for it. But at this point in time, most of it is done through the private contracting community to implement the works. Again, we will continue to look at where we can utilize BC Wildfire staff to do this work. There are a lot of synergies. There's a lot of good results in training for our staff. And again, like I said, we have done this in the past in the shoulder seasons, and I think we will continue to look at, is there efficiencies in actually having staff year round to actually complete this work rather than maybe contracting all of it out to the community. But I think in my mind, in the perfect world, it'll be a combination of both, because there's an employment generation, there's a community engagement perspective to this, and an employment perspective and a learning for our staff as well.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's availability. Have a great afternoon.
It's a blessing to be a part of such a special stage of their lives, even if it is for just a short time. Our curriculum, guidance strategies, experiences, and our nurturing and responsiveness can have an impact that lasts a lifetime. And to me, that's just magical. I want to share a little about my personal journey, how I got here with you today. Let me start by saying I live by the quote, "Be who you needed when you were younger." I had a difficult childhood and youth, and I know the impact that one passionate and dedicated person can have on your life. I grew up poor and endured many difficult circumstances. I had to learn to take care of myself and learn things the hard way in life because I never had the basic foundation of skills that people usually get in their early childhood. I moved out on my own at age 15, worked full-time, often overtime, to provide for myself with no support from anyone else, all to try and break the cycle. In the only way I knew could, which was through hard work. And yes, it was exhausting, but I did it. And it was only when I met my husband, Ahmed, who is here today, that I developed a healthy support system and I was able to pursue my dreams and move on with my life. I finished my education, first high school, and then my diploma in early childhood education here at the College of the North Atlantic, and it was an amazing experience, to say the least. I learned so much, not just about the field, but about myself as a person. During ECE week, I watched the House of Assembly to see who would win the first ever Joanne Juteau Early Childhood Education Scholarship presented by the Association of Early Childhood Educators of Newfoundland and Labrador. And when I heard Minister Tom Osborne say my name and listened as the rest of them spoke about my hard work as a young mom, wife, full-time student, and an employee with a 4.0 GPA, I just started crying. I was overwhelmed but extremely honored. Through these long and very hard years, I realized that no child should ever have to start off with no skills or skills in all the wrong areas. Every single child deserves the same opportunities and start to life. And I was finally ready to be that person I needed in my life so many years ago. I am passionate about providing high quality, equal, and diverse education to young children in my room and with all children that I work with. I'm passionate about building curriculums that are structured to the needs and interests of children and that intrinsically motivate them to become not only economically successful individuals one day, but happy, healthy, and kind individuals in all aspects of life. I remember when I first started my program, I was fresh off maternity leave. My son was 9 months and not sleeping through the night, and he still does not. I was exhausted and unsure if I was going to be able to do it at all, let alone be successful in my studies. I remember sitting through my first lecture, and I was hearing about these core values of ECEs and what it means to be in the field and work so closely with children. And I just had one of those surreal moments, and something just clicked. And I knew for me personally that being an early childhood educator would be as natural as breathing. Not because it's easy and not because I wouldn't have to work very hard every day, but because I knew every moment of studying, every late night and every early morning would be worth it if I get to spend the rest of my life bringing joy and happiness while educating young minds. In this profession, my goal is not just to be a part of the early childhood field, but to help shape it and be an advocate for all children, especially underprivileged children, children who are new to Canada, or are children of new Canadians, as well as children with diverse needs and challenges. I hope to be good enough at what I do to inspire other passionate individuals to complete their education and work in our beautiful field with these beautiful young children. Every single child deserves the best start at life. We need to believe in their capabilities instead of their vulnerabilities. And no barriers, financial or cultural, should be in the way of giving all children equal access to childcare programs. Thank you to everyone that is here today, the federal and provincial governments and Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Fury for supporting our children today and ECs. Today's announcement is so important to the very core of today's children who will be tomorrow's adults. Together, we can create an environment that encourages children to accept others, to keep discovering, and where we can continue to inspire them and through play. I will finish how I started this talk today on a personal note. My son is my greatest inspiration, my greatest blessing. My husband is our rock, and he has been the greatest support through these wild years. But without access to childcare, I wouldn't have been able to become an early childhood educator, a career that has since made me whole. Because of this, I know that no mother should have to choose between her dreams and her family. I am deeply honored and blessed to be here today, speaking about this beautiful path of life and seeing those who will be impacted by today's exciting news. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ocean. And I'm going to say on behalf of the entire CNA family, we are extremely proud to have been part of your journey and extremely proud that you have chosen a fantastic career and that we are going to be able to support all future ECE students. Ceci conclut notre programme officiel. This concludes our formal program. I now invite back the Prime Minister back to the podium to take questions from the media.
Thank you so much. The question period will be 25 minutes, one question, one follow-up per reporters, starting with the new network. Oui, bonjour, Héloïse de Radio-Canada. Monsieur Trudeau, pouvez-vous m'expliquer pourquoi vous avez choisi de dépenser plus d'argent des contribuables dans un projet qui a déjà englouti autant de fonds fédéraux et provinciaux?
Je pense que nous comprenons tous que l'énergie propre va faire va faire partie de l'avenir du Canada de façon encore plus importante dans les années à venir. Et nous reconnaissons à quel point c'est important d'avoir Terre-Neuve et Labrador en santé financièrement et en termes d'un avenir et d'un présent fort aussi. Donc nous sommes là. C'est ce que les Canadiens font. On est là pour s'entraider dans des moments de difficulté. On l'a vu pendant la pandémie. Et on va continuer de le voir quand différentes régions, différentes parties de notre pays font face à des défis. En tant que gouvernement fédéral, j'avais fait une promesse très simple au début de la pandémie qui s'applique à tous les jours, qu'on allait être là pour les Canadiens. Et aujourd'hui, on démontre qu'on est là pour les gens de Terre-Neuve et Labrador.
En suivi, le Québec s'est souvent opposé par le passé à l'aide fédérale pour Muskrat Falls. Est-ce que vous avez peur de vous aliéner des électeurs québécois dans les prochaines élections avec cette décision?
Je pense que les Québécois, comme tous les Canadiens, comprennent à quel point c'est important de s'entraider et de reconnaître quand il y a des défis pour lesquels nous pouvons et nous devons être là les uns pour les autres. Et je sais que les Québécois, comme tous les Canadiens, vont être contents de voir un avenir avec plus d'énergie propre, plus de prospérité pour tous et un meilleur avenir pour tous les Canadiens.
Prime Minister, there are other troubled hydro projects in the country, BC and Manitoba, for example. Why should Canada contribute billions of dollars to what is a provincial project? The mistakes that were made were provincial ones.
We recognize that there were significant mistakes made many years past, but also we recognize that it is important that Canadians be there for one another. That's certainly something we've seen throughout this pandemic. Canadians having each other's backs. It's a promise that this government made, not just to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, but indeed to all Canadians. We'd have their backs as much as it took, as long as it took to get through this pandemic, and that applies to other crises as well. We know the future is going to require more clean energy, more reliable cooperation between provinces across the country, and indeed better prosperity for all Canadians. And the pressures and the challenges faced by Newfoundlanders and Labradorians for mistakes made in the past is something that Canadians all needed to step up on, and that's exactly what we did. Canadians are happy to be there for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, as we will continue to be there for people right across the country.
And a follow-up question for the Premier. Your predecessor, 2 years ago, Dwight Ball, promised that with rate mitigation, rates would be stuck at 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Now the number is 14.7. Why weren't you able to stick to that number that was promised by Mr. Ball?
Sure. I think if you look closely into his comments, it was 13.5 until the end of 2021. I've always been on the record as saying 13.5 until commission. We know commission was coming. We know commission was coming in November, and subsequently that increased the urgency and the acuity of the issue that we were facing. And then thank God that the federal government was there to step up and let us recognize the problem and help us navigate the solution. So I always committed to 13.5 until commission. And I believe that's what the intent of, I can't speak for former Premier Ball, but I believe that that was the intent. Certainly, if you look at the numbers that were articulated during the time of sanction and you look through the LeBlanc report, of course, they were talking about rates that were well over 15 back when this project was first announced. That assumes, by the way, that the budget would be 6.2. It's not. It's 13 point plus. That it also assumed it was going to be 5 years. It's not. It's now 2021. We still haven't gone to commission. So they were recognizing that the cost of this project was well beyond 13.5, even at the time that this project was at its inception and then subsequently sanctioned. So I was never committed to 13.5, and of course we all know, we all live and breathe, prices of things do go up. Our hope would be that as we turn to electricity as a renewable source of energy, that will provide a market, a shift in the market that will allow the price to stay more competitive than ever before. So what I mean by that is more people turn to electricity to drive their vehicles. It will obviously drive the rate in the right direction. When we're really hopeful that that is the place that this province can achieve in the future. The other thing that, may be lost in some of this deal is that we still have excess energy up there that we can monetize to ensure that we have, as a Treasury, the ability to pull certain levers should rates get different than, and for some unforeseen circumstance that you can't predict right now. And that's where our government has always been, to try to risk mitigate overall, not just for what's good for tomorrow or the next day or even the next election cycle for that matter, what's better for the future of the province. And I think that this deal is a good one that allows us the freedom and autonomy to set our own course.
Ashley Fitzpatrick. I'm with Atlantic Business Magazine. For the Prime Minister, I'm actually wondering, it's come up in discussions around Canada Infrastructure Bank funding, but I'm wondering, in relation to what's been announced today, what you would say to anyone expressing a concern that Eastern Canadian power, Labrador power, could be slapped with the label of subsidized power and challenged in terms of trade into the United States?
Canada has negotiated a large number of trade deals over the past 5 years, from NAFTA to CETA to the CPTPP. We've demonstrated an ability to both stand up for our workers, whether it was standing up for steel and aluminum workers against the Trump tariffs that were unfairly put on us, whether it's standing up for our agricultural producers around the world, whether it's just being there to ensure that we're sticking up for Canadian industry and Canadian competitiveness right around the world, even as we became the only G7 country to have a free trade deal with every other G7 country. We are a government that understands the importance of trade, the importance of free and robust fair trade, but as well will never make any apologies for standing up for Canadians, because that's our job.
Just in a quick follow-up to that, then, would you consider it subsidized power at this point, power in Labrador?
I think we continue to work as partners, whether it's paid for by the province, whether it's paid for by the federal government in part. Taxpayers contribute, the same taxpayers all across the country. We build projects so that we can ensure that we are creating a better future with good jobs and affordable energy for everyone.
Kellyanne Roberts, NTV News. Prime Minister, many feel that this is now an election move, that this was needed 3 years ago for the province, and that if this deal isn't signed by October, then the PUB has to go with existing contracts. What do you say to people that says this should have happened 3 years ago?
I think there are many things that we've been working on for many, many years that do take time. And that's certainly something that we can talk about on the childcare, which were conversations that we started well before the bilateral deal signed in 2017. And it is being able to come to this point at which everything came together for a historic childcare agreement that was launched tangibly with the presentation of Budget 2021 by Canada's first woman finance minister, who demonstrated that we understand deeply the impacts of this she-cession that we've gone through because of the pandemic. Similarly, the conversations I've had over the years with all the different premiers of Newfoundland that I've had the privilege to work with, Newfoundland and Labrador that I've had the privilege to work with, sorry Yvonne, I'll make sure I remember, is extremely, has been productive. We've worked, as you will remember, on many different initiatives, whether it was $320 million for support for the oil and gas workers, whether it was $75 million for emissions reductions over the past number of months. We're going to continue to work and get things rolling as quickly as possible. That's what Canadians and indeed Newfoundlanders and Labradorians expect from us, and that's what we'll keep doing.
This is an agreement in principle, so until ink hits paper, I think a lot of people will struggle to believe it's going to come to fruition. When do you plan on signing for this to happen?
Well, you know, when even reporters are saying, well, this deal sounds too good to be true, it's a very good day for a government to make this sort of announcement. We are there for Newfoundland and Labrador, whether it was talking about the Atlantic Accords, whether it was dealing with so many different concerns that have come up over the past years. I think this federal government has demonstrated that we are going to be there for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and indeed that we will continue to be there for all Canadians, because, like I said, this pandemic has shown us what we all know. Canadians are there for each other when times get tough.
Hi there. Question for the Prime Minister. My name is Sarah. I'm with the Canadian Press. Last week, your government pledged to resettle Afghans who worked with Canada over the past 2 decades. Successful applicants can move to the country with their children and spouses, but many say their parents and extended family remained under threat from the Taliban because of their work as interpreters or staff members. Will these parents and extended family be allowed to resettle in Canada under this newly announced program?
As you know, our Minister of Immigration and foreign ministers and others have worked extremely hard to ensure that Afghan people who were there to support Canadians, to help in our missions and our hard work overseas continue to be kept safe and not put at risk because they were helping Canadians. And obviously our priority is helping them and their immediate families. But I can highlight at the same time that we are continuing to expand the family reunification programs available to all Canadians, to all immigrants and permanent residents to Canada. And this is something we will continue to look at.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has asked Governor General Mary Simon to turn down any request from you to dissolve Parliament and call an election. The Governor General does have this power, but the last time that happened was in 1926. Do you think that she should accede to a request from you to call an election, and that her refusal will undermine Canada as an independent country where power lies with the House of Commons and the government?
Our focus as a government is and has been being there for Canadians, being there through this pandemic and being there as we rebuild better, as we create a more prosperous country with more opportunities for everyone from coast to coast to coast. That has been my single-minded focus throughout this pandemic, and it's unfortunate that regularly on important issues, from net zero legislation to banning conversion therapy to protect LGBT kids, to moving forward on eliminating mandatory minimums to help communities that are racialized and more vulnerable, or whether it's moving forward on continuing to ban and firm up the ban on assault weapons. When Conservatives in the House used every procedural tactic to try and delay, to block, to slow things down, the NDP stood aside and watched. They could have stood with us to move forward faster on these important progressive pieces of legislation, but they didn't. So we've seen that even during a pandemic, even as we were able to get out historic supports for Canadians, I think Canadians deserve to have governments and parliamentarians focused on them, not focused on politicking. That's what we've been as a government, and that's what we will continue to do every single day.
Afternoon, Alex Bill from All Newfoundland Labrador. Was the net profit interest from Hibernia a topic of communication between your government and either the Fury or Ball governments prior to these negotiations over Muskrat Falls, or did it arise after these negotiations began?
I can tell you that even as a non-Newfoundlander, I know this has been a topic of conversation for Newfoundlanders for a very, very long time. We are glad to be able to move forward and make sure that Newfoundlanders can properly benefit from a project that they have led for so very long.
We heard earlier today from Peter Bernashue that the Innu were largely left out of these negotiations, and in fact are concerned that they may be facing costs if dividend payments from Muskrat Falls are deferred. And in the technical briefing that this more or less didn't come up. Is this something that is going to have to be looked at in a different way before this agreement is finalized?
Reconciliation is something of fundamental importance to our government, as we've demonstrated time and time again. But it's not just about the federal government. It's also very much around provincial governments. And I know that Premier Fury is well placed to speak to this issue on the Innu.
Thanks. Of course, we look forward to working with the Innu moving forward. We had a technical briefing with them last night from officials, and then they were part of the technical briefing this morning. And I mean, as you can see from the details of the agreement in principle, this has been, even though it's been done as it should be commercially kept, to officials, we've been fairly transparent. All this stuff, if you look at the tape from December, was stuff that we were talking about back then. So there was nothing really hidden in any of the levers that we pulled really to get here. But we certainly, I have a great relationship and speak with Indigenous leaders every single week. I speak with the Indigenous leaders more than I speak with my own cabinet, sorry. But I'm sure that this will be as they are briefed and as we all understand the deal better, I'm sure they will be more happy as the details become more available to them.
Thank you. Question for the Prime Minister. It's Brian Callahan from VOCM News. Prime Minister, much has been made of the so-called Atlantic Loop. Some people still aren't quite sure what that entails, as well as the region being the so-called green battery for, the region, rightly so with Muskrat, so-called clean energy. I'm just wondering what, if any, other concerns from those other players, whether it's the provinces, the Atlantic provinces, or Quebec, or Hydro-Quebec, were there any consultations there to give them a heads of what's going on? Was there support, or possibly was there any negative reaction to this deal?
I can say over the past number of months and indeed years, when we've been working on a very strong Atlantic growth strategy, the idea of clean electricity is of utmost importance, particularly to those provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick among them, that are still relying on less clean sources of electricity. The obvious ability to tie together Atlantic provinces and Quebec in access to clean hydropower that is going to be an important part of our future is a goal that we all share. Yes, there's always going to be conversations and ways to work things through, but I can highlight that the strong working relationship both within the Atlantic region as premiers and with the federal government has always led us to being able to work together well, and we will continue to do just that.
And we haven't touched any of those assets, right?
Yeah.
Follow up for the Premier, if that's no offense.
There you go.
So just to follow up on that, all of those assets are still, still green in the figurative sense too. They've been untouched. So, none of this deal is predicated on any of that development. So we still have, as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, incredible opportunities in front of us as we emerge from not just the pandemic, but merge into the new economy, which is green-based. And we know that all the other Atlantic provinces are going to need to access some of this energy that we have. But this deal is not predicated on any of that. So there are no giveaways in this deal. This is just dealing with the first part, which I always said, as you'll remember, and you look at the tapes, the loop may be circular, but this deal has to be linear, and it has to start with Muskrat Falls.
If I could shift gears just back to, we saw earlier the photo up with the children here, and I'm just wondering, you made immigration, of course, a pillar of one of your, I think might have been the top 3.
It is.
As there's very little diversity reflected today with the children here. Now, I bring this up, I've already had a few tweets, such as reaction, just wondering, some people don't feel it's reflective of the new immigrant community that's been blossoming in this province.
Well, I can tell you that the children that were there were beautiful and all very happy to see us all. I think what's more important is look at where we want to go as a society and as a government. I've been firmly committed to immigration. I would say it's, if not top 3, it's within the top 3, if not the top 1 of our policy moving forward. You've heard me say everything else is an accounting exercise. We have a real demographic problem here, and if we don't address it through driving the population through healthy immigration, doubling the targets, we've revamped the immigration department entirely. It's a new style of doing business with respect to immigration, and we hope that when there's a prime minister and a premier here in 10 years, that those children will look very differently.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de.
And they're stuck, discriminated against based on the vaccine brand that they were injected with.
The short answer is I have full confidence that the United States will be looking at the same things that we're looking at about the effectiveness of vaccine programs. And in the same way, they're not going to deny access to millions of people from the UK. They're not going to prevent people from Canada entering the US when they're ready to do that as well. We can't we can't foreshadow what other countries are going to do, but we can try and influence it, and we're working with Canada to do that.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.